Hey, Anthony, thank you for coming in. You have this amazing career as a computer scientist and as a legal expert, a lawyer, and a CIO, and being the leader of various communities in the tech sector and more. And they're quite an unusual confluence of capabilities, all very interdisciplinary. So you're very rare, very unique in all of these talents that you bring to any kind of global solution. So, I want to thank you for coming in and sharing all of that experience and wisdom to our audience.
Well, thank you, Stephen, for inviting me. It's been a privilege to be with you today, and I look forward to sharing the session and the process with you. So, as you mentioned, I do have two very distinguished professional membership in two very diverse areas. First of all, in the ICT industry, as an ICT practitioner for many years, including as a CIO, as well as a practicing lawyer in the legal space with clients in the legal industry. So yeah, it's a unique combination. I'd like to explore that with you in terms of the session today, because like you, it's not something that I started with. It's sort of fall into it by accident. I started with a double degree at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, and I decided to do a double major in computer science and law, which at that time was a very rare combination. And I recall having great difficulties with getting the time slot for lectures in sync, because they're going to have students doing those two disciplines ever. And then I recall having to dash from one end of the campus, from the computer science lab, to go to my lectures in law, which is the other side of the campus. So leaving me 5 minutes to do the marathon race across the campus. So yeah, it was an interesting time. I'm not sure why I started doing both, but having done 1 year both, I thought, yeah, this is really what I'm interested in. It's the passion like I like to cultivate. It's challenging, it's innovative, it's very different. Two very diverse areas. The law being very conservative, traditional, the application of the law established over and slowly evolving over many, many centuries in parallel with the establishment and involvement of the human civilization itself and our human structures. And when we compare that with computer science, always on the move at lightning speed, Stephen, very innovative, very disruptive, always continuing and disrupting our established human structures and our way of doing things, challenging the status quo with the latest upgrade, the latest application devices, changing the very foundations on the way we live, work, and play, and some might say the basis of our human civilization itself. Because now we are questioning and people are asking, can AI be sentient? So I come from an education background which is very diverse, which is, I would say, extreme. To have that combination and that challenging combination, yeah, it's a very good foundation for where we are today. Because if you look at what we're doing, whether it's in the ICT space or in our human space, we are now coming to grips with how would the law catch up to do all these things that we're now seeing with Internet of Things, AI, machine learning, data governance, data management, cybersecurity, augmented and mixed reality, you name it. Those emerging tech is changing the very basis of how we work and live. So I'm very pleased and very passionate to be in this space. It's challenging at times because I'm trained to be a lawyer, and technology, which I'm also trained in, is disrupting the very foundation of what I've been taught at law school and how our legal foundation, legal structures are built and established over many, many centuries.
I mean, I can see all of this embodied in all of the leadership roles, and now this is very much embodied in an organization called IFIP, founded in 1960 by UNESCO, but really it's an independent organization consisting of a federation of national and international computing organizations. ACM, for example, Association of Computing Machinery, which is #1 in computing science, is an international member. The Australian Computer Society, the preeminent national society in Australia, is a member. KIPS out of Canada, which is the Canadian Information Processing Society, is a member, and the list goes on and on. And now you have the very prestigious position of being the incoming president of this very old organization, but can be very influential as well. So congratulations. But then the next question is, what do you plan to do as president?
Thank you, Stephen. So thank you, and it's been a privilege to be elected as the new president of IFIP, the International Federation for Information Processing. As you know, Stephen, you've also been involved with IFIP and IP3 for many years. Yes, we just celebrated the 60th anniversary of IFIP, established under the auspices of UNESCO after a World Computer Congress conference in Paris. As you know, UNESCO is based in Paris. So IFIP is much structured like the UN bodies with member states and member societies. So the establishment of IFIP itself is parallel in the way that UN agencies were established and work today. So we have many countries from 5 continents who are members. If you mention ACM in the US and many parts of the world, is a member of IFIP, including countries like Brazil, the Brazilian Computer Society, the Computer Society of Sri Lanka that we both spoke last week at their 40th conference, Japan, South Korea, Australia, obviously, where I'm based, and past president of the Australian Computer Society, New Zealand, South Africa, Nigeria, and many countries in Europe, including the British Computer Society, BCS, in the UK, Netherlands, Germany, Austria, Italy, the list goes on and on. So we have a collection of many countries around the world built like the UN bodies. They're all structured in similar lines, working on many issues for the ICT profession, the academics, and the research fraternity. So we have 13 technical committees in IFIP, over more than 100 working groups. The total membership of our member societies spread across 5 continents amounts to more than 500,000 members. So yeah, we have this collection, and I'm very privileged to be leading this organization at this time. And as the United Nations Secretary General said recently in his 2020 report, the world is at an inflection point. Technology evolves so rapidly, but we must also look at not just the opportunities and the benefits, but looking at the risks and providing risk mitigation for some of those challenges that we are already seeing in the space, whether it is AI bias discrimination, the human in the loop in decision making, whether it's the use of data for many applications and new innovation discoveries versus the rights of human dignity, privacy, protection, and also obviously the data protection itself. So there are many challenges going forward, but with this group of experts around the world, that we have in IFIP from all our member societies and all our technical groups, we are, I think, in a very good position to assist the world and the UN with the 17 SDG goals to help to mitigate the challenges, as well as to help with most of the innovation that's coming on in this space. So I'm very privileged to be here at this time to lead the organization and also, like with you, involved in other parts of the ICT industry in IFIP and ACM and so forth.
So, it's an older organization. It's a large federation of all these national and international societies around computing and innovation and transformation, and also has a big academic community that's associated with it, together with industry. You come from industry, and you, even though you do also touch academia as well, but you are a practitioner in that you execute on goals, and that's being your driving mission. And for example, a CIO, I mean, you're accountable. You're smart, specific, measurable goals within a particular time frame. How is the flavor of Anthony as being the president of IFIP going to present itself, manifest itself, and how will it differ from, let's say, 20 years ago? I wouldn't say 10 years ago, but let's say 20 or 30 years ago, from its roots. How will your presidency be different, and what are some of the specific things you'd like to have done in your term? And your term is what, 4 years, and then often presidents get a second term of another 4 years. So what do you hope to achieve in your first term?
The term is 3 years, Stephen, with another 3 years option. Yeah. So let me start with looking at the background and how I'm going to utilize that background to work with IFIP, lead the organization, and work with all our stakeholders, including the United Nations agencies, including ITU and UNESCO and UNTAG around the world, to assist with some of the world challenges. Firstly, as you correctly say, I'm from the industry. I remember when I first graduated in computer science, when I'm still undertaking my final years in law at Monash. I was working, my first job was as a computer operator, operating, backing up systems for a lighting company close to the university. And that was really my beginning of the ICT career, starting as a law-based computer operator when I just finished ICT education, but still undertaking my law degree. Then I moved on to greater things. I also did apprenticeship with a law firm and I actually, when I was in my final year of law, wrote to the two first ICT lawyers in Australia. They were doing some innovative work in the space. So I said, I'm about to graduate with a double degree. I'd like to come and work with you in this innovative space. They sent me one day to go to the High Court to get, in those days, we don't have the internet. So that declares my age, Stephen. But I had to go physically to get a copy of the High Court judgment from the High Court itself, from the printers, and it was hot on the prints. I remember the High Court judgment about whether software is protected under copyright law in Australia. So the case was momentous change in terms of ICT. Obviously, protection under copyright is important for software, and it's now the norm in most parts of the world. And I recall moving from there to go back to the industry. When I finished both degrees, I thought I really need to understand how the ICT industry works in order for me to eventually practice in both areas of law and computers. So I worked my way up as a programmer, as a project manager, as a director, working my way up to finally the final role I had in the ICT industry, a dedicated role as a CIO for the Australian Tourist Commission during the Sydney Olympics 2000. where we create the most innovative ICT for promotion of Australia worldwide as a tourist destination in conjunction with the Sydney Olympics. So that was challenging time, but that was the highlight of my ICT career itself. So, but from those days on, I remember, Stephen, like you, when we attended one of the ACML and Turing Awards in San Francisco a few years ago, where they had a conference before they gave Tim Berners-Lee his Google Prize from the ACM Turing Awards, how that conference featured ICT people talking about how the law should be changed to actually help the human structures and building a new capacity, our new regulatory frameworks, new structures to enable the challenges as well as to facilitate the innovative emergence of technology in all space of life, work, and play. That day, Stephen, with you in that room too, it dawned on me that my world, the two worlds that I belong to, has actually intersected. That now I can actually fully practice as both as someone working in the ICT space, as someone working in the legal space as well. But I do have also a teaching career, so I know a lot of my colleagues in IFIP are academics and professors, but I also have a distinguished privilege to teach a master program in ICT law at one of the universities in Australia. And for many years, I was involved with one of the universities here, UTS, in the advisory group, looking at their curriculum and some of their ICT training curriculum challenges moving forward. So over the space, yes, I'm a practitioner, but I also have a strong basis in academia. And I'm very proud to say recently with IFIP, I've published 2 published paper in Springer. So like many of us now, we are moving into a multidisciplinary space. If you say, what am I? I'll say I'm many parts of many things, because the way we're moving in terms of challenges and innovation that we need to put in place for the world, we need many parts of many people to help to create new opportunities, as well as to mitigate some of those risks moving forward. So in terms of that, I bring all those parts to IFIP, having an established career in multinationals as well, like Thomson and Philips, the Dutch ICT company, which many years had an ICT division, doing some of the most innovative developments in ICT space in the world and its application around the world. So I had the fortunate time to work in some of those multinational companies around the world, as well as the smaller development houses. So in terms of that, I'm bringing the breadth and length of the experience. So over the time, working with many people, the teams, my staff, as well as with professional bodies like IFIP and the Australian Computer Society. I also learn about humans and human behaviors, the attributes to lead humans to accomplish great deeds and great goals. And I think with that experience, I look forward to help to develop some of the programs with IFIP to help with where we're going with the world. So if you look at some of the mission statement of IFIP itself, Stephen, which was established many, many years ago, and now we're going to past 60 years old. The very basis, the aim of and mission statement of IFIP, which is still so much relevant today, even though it's been many years in the making, it's about to achieve the worldwide professional, number 1. Number 2, socially responsible development of ICT. So if you look at those 2 main objectives of IFIP itself, you can see as a federation, because we are not an individual membership society. Our members are society members, like the BCS, the ASEAN, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, and so forth. We are not an individual membership. We are a federation, like the UN, one of the UN agency, in this particular one, UNESCO. So in terms of worldwide professional and responsible deployment of ICT, we have a big goal ahead for IFIP, working with many stakeholders around the world, and with our UN and the many UN agencies around the world, to look at those two things, which are complementary to our mission. As I mentioned, we have 13 technical committees, 100 working groups. We have members across 5 continents of this world, from Brazil to South Africa and Canada and Europe. We have all this expertise working in many fields of human endeavor and ICT. My role as the president now is to harness all that expertise, all that knowledge, all that skills, all that background, all that multidisciplinary abilities to help the world with moving forward with some of the innovative practice of ICT, but as well as looking at some of the challenges that I mentioned, particularly AI, ethics and regulation. We have looked at many features of that around the world, from the European Union to Australia itself, looking at how to regulate this thing called AI and the use of data, how to protect data, how to manage data, how to govern data, which is being used to feed artificial intelligence and automated systems. So yeah, the scope is there for us. The mission is still alive and relevant today, even more after 60 years, if not so more important today than yesterday. The ability for us as an organization and our breadth and scope are immense. And with that expertise, I have no doubt that we will play a great role in this space moving forward. So just in the past week or two after taking on the role, we're about to start off a new task force on digital education, looking at the global framework for sustainable digital education for 5 years old to 18 years old. So we, at the throes of setting up a task force with some of our leaders across our IFIP world, from Sri Lanka to Europe and South Africa and Nigeria, to look at how to assist on this very important topic on the UN agenda. In addition, about to start off another task force looking at climate change and technology. Our Brazil Computer Society has agreed to host that new task force, which is in formulating. And recently, we just signed an MOU and a partnership with ITU, AI for Good, to help them with an IFIP AI for Good series starting April next year, looking at some of those innovation and challenges from artificial intelligence itself. And as you're aware, we also, with your assistance, connected with ITU on the cybersecurity space. ITU is so much into the cyber security, building world capacity for cybersecurity specialists. And now with the elevation and election of the new general, with the new Secretary General for ITU, Doreen, that you know and familiar with. And she's been very instrumental in establishing of that cybersecurity framework for ITU. So there's a lot of scope for IFIP to play. I'm definitely tuned into those activities and working with our stakeholders and leadership to make sure that IFIP is there and positioned to assist the many agencies of the world and our stakeholders. So thank you, Stephen, for that question. I know it's a lot to take in, but yeah, it's a big scope, it's a big role, but with the expertise that we have across many fields, including our IP3, which you've been actively involved with, I've no doubt that IFIP will be very successful working with members of society, ACM, BCS, ACS, and many, many others around the world to assist.
That's very interesting. You're working with different UN agencies. We're a child of UNESCO, so you have programs and things associated with UNESCO too. And UNESCO came out with their ethical AI recommendations, which were approved by their member states in November of last year. And then in December, they actually profiled the top 100 companies, or more than that, companies, organizations, really solutions involving AI. And then in February of this year, they spotlighted the outstanding 10. And these do follow the recommendations, and they're spotlighted because they address the ethical side. And that's a strength of yours as well. You being a proponent of the ethical aspects from a framework principles now to an operational side where you can actually use it. And that's wearing both your computer science hat, but also wearing your legal hat. Can you talk about some of that work and how it's evolved over the last, let's say, 3 or 4 years, and where you see it evolving in the next 2 or 3 years?
As someone with a background in multidisciplinary law and ICT, I'm always conscious about when I work with people, am I working in the siloed ICT space or in the legal space? So that has been crossed my mind for many years, but now with those two areas converging and with more other issues like psychology, philosophy, all integrated in how we move forward, it's an interesting time for me as well, as for many people, even with my background. So recently, UNESCO has asked us to look at helping them with the implementation of that declaration that you mentioned about. I've already had 2 meetings with UNESCO on that, and I'm about to have a third meeting with Gabriela Ramos on Thursday, virtually, to look at how IFIP can assist UNESCO in the implementation effort. For many years, you and I work in IP3, part of the IFIP, professional practice. We look at issues of ethics from technology, from many angles and many fields. But only in recent time, we've seen the world establish many type of ethics framework to do with AI and many other emerging technology issues. Now there are hundreds of those frameworks in place, from the OECD to different countries' frameworks, and even private NGOs frameworks. But now, as you know, the world is now looking at regulating that space. So the question now is, how do you operationalize some of these issues that we talked about in terms of ethical framework into regulatory framework? And that itself is an interesting prospect because it hasn't really been done in the world previously. But if you follow the developments in the European Union, which perhaps most advanced in this space, the proposed EU AI legislation that's been debated in the EU Parliament and the Council, and also looking at their data sharing frameworks, from the Data Act to the Data Sharing Act for the private industry, to the Digital Markets Act and the other digital frameworks they've got. So indeed, it is an interesting time, I think, for many of us, and definitely with the skills that I have in the fields that we talked about, I'm in a good position to lead IFIP to assist those efforts around the world. It is, I think, as the UN Secretary General said it's an inflection point, it's inflection time, because those technologies are rolling out as we speak at lightning speeds. But our frameworks in the way we work, live, and play, our human structures, our regulatory framework, our government structures, they are not evolving fast enough to catch up with some of those developments. So definitely there's a role for me to lead. There's a role for IFIP to play with all our numerous stakeholders around the world, including our member societies, who are also going through that space with their governments, with those UN agencies. So I think it's a great time and a great position to be for IFIP, working with all our stakeholders, our members like ACM, who's very innovative in the space as well, the British Computer Society in the space, the Australian Computer Society. So in the times that I have been involved with the Australian Computer Society, we have moved into the policy area, like many of our member societies, how to advocate government to look at those emerging areas, how to manage them, how to work with them, how to mitigate the risks, how to provide framework that could perhaps start with a light approach to regulate and manage some of these rollouts to mitigate some of the risks to the individuals, to the way we live, work, and play. So I'm very passionate. I think the stars are aligned, Stephen, with me and with IFIP and many of our member societies. There are great roles to play. Not to play for itself, for the sake of itself, but to assist humanity in this great time and change.
You know, the work that IFIP is doing, and then also the work that you've done as well as a lawyer, but also as an ICT professional, as a computer expert, you've been involved in the code of ethics and sort of the ethical aspects, which then evolved into AI, and then of course the metaverse, and all of that prior work then builds into the rollout of the confluence of all of these metaverse technologies, which some are estimating to be, you know, a post $10 trillion marketplace within 10 years. And do you plan to put out a paper or IFIP to address sort of this evolution of things moving towards the metaverse and this confluence of all these technologies in the metaverse, or really focusing on more the fundamentals, which are AI, or the components that make up the metaverse?
Thank you for that question. Interestingly enough, with your good introduction to the ITU at WISS recently, I had this conversation with Fred for AI for Good, and I did ask him, when are you going to move faster to the area of metaverse? Yeah, I think, and I said, yeah, 5 years ago when AI for Good was created, metaverse was just in its infancy. Now it's a bit like what you did for AI and with you, Stephen, 5 years ago. Now we need to start fast the conversation on metaverse, because metaverse encompass many areas of things that we've just discussed. It has facets, obviously, of augmented mixed reality and virtual reality, but it has AI in it as well. It's a whole basis of the metaverse. But we do have other things involved as well, obviously, IoT, blockchain, and many, many things. So the world is getting more complicated, not because we want it to be, but because those technology have many facets to it. So must we now be multifacets, because to cope and manage and develop those new things with many facets, we need to be multiple faceted ourselves to understand how they should be evolving and how they should be managed and developed ethically, and how they should be deployed and used in many areas of the human endeavor, whether it's in private enterprise or in public or in the individual space. So metaverse is one great area. I had this conversation with ITU, and I can see they're already moving into that space. but perhaps we need to accelerate that, because AI for Good is a great platform for education, for getting people to across the world, not just in developed countries, but particularly in developing countries, about what is happening in this space. And I see that with the new neural platform network, that's a great platform for IFIP to work in collaboration with ITU to seize that great effort around the world.
So just a bit, provide a bit of context for the audience. The ITU is the International Telecommunications Union. It's a UN agency that's 157 years old, so it actually predates the UN. And the reason is that 157 years ago, they needed standards for communications, like Morse code and so on. So people had to come together and agree. And that's the reason behind originally ITU, this International Telecommunications Union. And then later they became a UN agency. But anything to do with technology, that's the ITU. And the ITU is unusual in that they actively engage with industry, because industry has to be part of standards, and they actively engage with government and research institutes. And so in that way, they're quite unique and a good UN agency in which IFIP once, is collaborating and has entered into a partnership with, because they span every segment of society. So, and then, you're part of the leadership of making sure that collaboration is tight, and, you can execute. And you mentioned Fred earlier. Fred is their head of strategy and partnerships within the AI for Good program, but also within ITU. So that's where you're suggesting ideas, but he has the ability to execute on the ITU side. So I just wanted to give a bit of context, because there's a lot to unpack in some of the the initiatives that you're leading and that you're partaking in. You're a futurist too. I mean, that's part of your resume. You're experienced corporate executive, you're a CIO, information technology lawyer, you have 30 years of executive experience, but you're also a futurist. So where do you see as the tech that we should be looking at now, even though it's an outlier or it's really early? Can you name a few or ones that that we can anticipate it being more mainstream, even though maybe they're an outlier right now?
Thank you for that, Stephen. Like you, until recently, I never thought myself as a futurist. But then I look back at my career and the things that I did, installing the most innovative applications for government and industry, and helping develop systems for the world, applications, that you discovered that you've been on that journey for many years, working in many areas of the endeavor. And you've been working with organizations to look at how they apply those technologies and how to best deploy them. So yeah, it's a surprise to me that I, by an accident, came with that word futurist. And I definitely talked a lot about the future application of things. I think at this time, Stephen, instead of new names to all things, I think we're now looking at a combination of the emerging technologies that we've just discussed in many fields. I think the great area now is the convergence of these emerging technologies like AI, virtual reality, mixed reality, IoT, blockchain, and the list goes on. But because they are converging, now we are looking at new ways of using them. New ways of application, like the Metaverse, new ways of digital ways of doing things, whether it's digital currency, whether it's crypto, how to protect that. I mean, and also new forms of art created by autonomous AI systems. Who owns those art? So definitely there are mixed opportunities and mixed blessings as well as challenges, because those are very, in terms of its use, it's going to have disruptive influences in the way we think, in how our law is structured, Should we give rights to AI and autonomous things? How far could they go? Could they own their creations? What about NFTs created by those things? Who do they belong to? And how do we attribute value to those things, which from until recently was sold for vast sums of money? So those are some of those thinking and challenges moving forward. But there are also great applications of those new combination and convergence of technology in many fields of human endeavor, like medicine, the way we go about in space exploration, the way we conduct ourselves, digital twins, in the way we build our new digital cities, digital framework. How do we digitize the physical world so that we can get better access to information, better sharing, better interfaces, but obviously come with these challenges of cybersecurity and data protection, as well as data ownership. So those things all come together. You cannot have those things with or without the other. So I think rather than just concentrating on one new name for a new thing, I think now is the time where we're looking at the convergence of those things and how they are deployed, applied, and developed across our space.
You know, I can see what you're saying too, right? Because we're at this particular, as you mentioned, convergence or confluence, which affects, you know, the public, the commercial, the technology, the legal, the governance side, compliance, risk management, and even in your profile, you talk about your background in cyber and digital transformation and change management, and involving things like education, tourism, insurance, financial services, media and publishing, business services. Really, the list is endless. And then your background, again, really leading in the areas from a legal, but also from an ICT leadership standpoint. Things like the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which came out in in 2016, right, where it's introduced. But even before that, the Internet of Things and big data management and AI, and you mentioned that virtual reality, augmented reality, cloud and blockchain, and so on. The thing is that's really fascinating about you, Anthony, is you've been across all of it. You've been deeply involved with all of it. You've been deeply involved in terms of the risk mitigation and about how do we govern these things and what is the impact it's going to have on society and on our culture, and what are the long-term implications of that. And you've been thinking about, and more than that, you've been working with legislators on this, and you've been working with different bodies, not just the UN bodies, but national societies, international computing societies, government agencies, and so on. So you really have been merging all of these different aspects together. And I guess that leads to my final question, because you are the embodiment of everything that's occurred over the last multiple decades, and because you've been involved in all of it, and you've been executing across all of it. What recommendations would you leave to the audience? Like, how can they be involved, or what are the things that you think that they should turn their attention to? And because my audience is very diverse, I do have government people in my audience. I have UN people in my audience. I have scientists in my audience, and also investors and CEOs. So maybe you have a general recommendation, or maybe you want to parcel it into sort of different sectors or pillars. But what are your final recommendations to the global audience out there?
Perhaps if I take a step back, Steve, and you mentioned about me being a futurist, and I'd like to perhaps draw on one of the experiences that I had in my previous career. I remember a time when I worked for Thomson, which is now Thomson Reuters, where they asked me to help with the digitization of their physical publishing empire in the printing place, paper publishing, and they're moving to the digital. And they asked me to come in as a consultant to help them with that digital transformation. That's even before the word digital transformation comes into being. And that's even before the word digital economy comes into being. And that's even before startups, the name startups come into being. I created the first startup for Thomson, looking at how to create a new entity within Thomson to do just digital publishing from scratch, building the pool of developers, programmers, creating the infrastructure, putting in the systems, the computers, working with the established paper process publishing expertise, getting them to see the vision, getting them to embrace the change. Obviously, it was a time of fear for the people who work in that printing press and the publishing industry for many years in the physical means. Had this Anthony coming in and say, let's do digital transformation. So that was an interesting time, because I've learned a lot from that time working with humans, how to help to first of all, work with them to create a climate of trust in terms of leading them to look at the prospects of the future rather than fear technology, embrace it, and how it could be a benefit to them in their work. How can they be a benefit, obviously, to the corporation concerned, in this case, Thomson, in creating this new endeavor, new field of digital publishing. So that was a huge learning curve for me too, in terms of looking at the facets of working with the individual, working with the human emotion, working with the human psyche, working with the workforce development, giving that cultural change. That perhaps leads me to, in terms of a position to work with our multiple stakeholders, the multiple facets. So in terms of my recommendation, where we're moving to, we're going to need a lot of different expertise to work with many facets. Having one discipline gives you a focus, a very good focus, but a very narrow focus. How do we, as separate individuals across the government space, across the more than the government, the public, the private, the commercial, the individual space, how do we have this facets of a good education to give a good foundation to work with many things across the space, to embrace some of these new emerging technologies, as well as its use and deployment and development and its challenges moving forward. I see we're looking at the time and space when if you look at the time of Galileo teaching in the University of Padua in Italy, he taught everything under the sun. There were no such thing as chemistry, physics, astronomy, all packaged in separate discipline to train in multiple silos. I think now is the time we need to bring all these disciplines back together, not just in a corporation, but also in us as individuals, because we need some of those skills to traverse some of the challenges coming forward, as well as the opportunities. So we need a much broader looking space than what we had before. One discipline is not going to be sufficient enough, I think, for us to fully embrace all these opportunities, all this framework that's coming forward. Yes, we can set up teams of multiple focus. We can set up teams of multiple skills people. But at the end of the day, we need that communication between the brains, the internet working, the dialogue, the conversation. Perhaps looking at myself with that different backgrounds, because I sometimes look at myself in terms of having that conversation within one brain between 2 or 3 disciplines. How do I manage and handle those things from multiple facets point of view, so that I can get the most creative solutions to embrace some of those challenges? So yeah, it's a complicated time for us, but I think it's also a great time for humanity if we can embrace and be more broadly focused in our outlook in life, in our education. I think definitely our education needs to be more broadly focused rather than siloed, narrowly focused, because we need to get the new workforce into the future, with a much broader perspective than we had done so in the past.
your presidency and your career actually will reflect all of the things that you mentioned, right? Because you've always been interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. There's a lot of these different terms, and really by its nature and its founding, IFIP is that way as well. So, as you mentioned, maybe right time, right place, and there's a lot of major challenges, but there's also great opportunities, which requires a multi-stakeholder approach, which has always been this sort of drumbeat of the UN, multi-stakeholder, but you're the epitome of multi-stakeholder as well. So, Anthony, thank you for coming in, and we really look forward to your presidency. And I got it wrong, 3 years. So 3 years and then 3 years. I was thinking 4 years. And so I know you're going to have an impact. I know it's going to be an inflection point in the history of IFIP, and it'll put IFIP into such a great path. Because you're the right person for the right time and for the right period of which this transformational thinking is required, and all of the disciplines that you bring to bear in this really important role. So I guess there's multiple things. Thank you for coming in and sharing your insights, but also for public service, all of the public service that you've demonstrated throughout your life, and this being one of the capstones as president of this amazing organization, IFIP. So thank you again.
Thank you, Stephen, for the opportunity, and I look forward to work with you and all our stakeholders moving forward. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.